The Roman Empire. Of all the nations that ever dominated the ancient world, no one quite gained the type of territory the Romans did. Expanding across the Mediterranean and much of Europe, this single empire remained for many generations the standard of excellence among European statesmen. Let us now explore this last of the great Iron Age empires. This is the empire that's genesis lies in the archaic period of antiquity, and whose demise falls in the dawn of the Middle Ages, at least in the West. The Eastern Empire actually continues as far as the Renaissance, making this one of the most long-lived states in the history of the world. But without further ado, let us explore the Romans. Genesis de Romana. The birth, the origin of Rome. So Rome began as a city-state along the Tiber River, just as many other city-states were at the time. Rome gained hegemony, so essentially began as a hegemony. It began just expanding influence, dominating nearby Latin tribes, nearby groups of people that were similar language group that lived in the same area. From there, the Romans began a campaign against the Etruscans, who were at the time the dominant polity in the area. Many of the descriptions of the wars between the Romans and the Etruscans are found in Livy. And according to Livy, the Etruscans themselves were once kings over the Romans, who were later expelled after the rape of Lucretia, which is a rather horrifying story about the name sort of says it all. We can discuss that further in class, but it is part of the origin of the Roman Republic and how Rome eventually came to escape kingship. From there, Rome conquered Carthage, who were their main rivals. The Carthaginians were a Phoenician, Canaanite city-state in northern Africa, south of Italy, and they feuded with the Romans for control over southern Italy. The Romans expanded into Greece. I mentioned last time their battles with Macedonia. They conquered the Macedons, they conquered Athens, Sparta, all of that. They then expanded into the Seleucid Empire. There they backed many of the rebellions. They backed the Maccabees and continued to put pressure on them. They also formed an alliance with Ptolemaic Egypt, who was the main rival of the Seleucids. After the fall of the Seleucids, Rome eventually begins turning its sights on Israel and on Ptolemaic Egypt, which it eventually conquers. Rome will eventually spread from as far north as Britain to as far south as Egypt, and from as far west as Hispania, the Iberian Peninsula, it's now Spain and Portugal, to as far east as parts of Israel and Syria. This is a massive empire. So, an imperial republic. So, for much of its history, Rome was a republic. From its foundings, basically from its early days, around 500 or so BC, all the way until the history, and all the way through Roman times up until 28, 29 or so BC, Rome is a republic. And during that time, it conquers most of its territory. In fact, only a little bit of extra territory is actually added during the period of the emperors. So it's very interesting that similar to Greece, similar to Athens, we have a representative government that is also an imperialistic government. So emperors and empire building. The emperors continue to rule the Mediterranean. Under Trajan, some of the empire was expanded to include parts of what's now like the interior of Austria and Czech Republic, the areas around the Danube. The other thing is universal citizenship. In the 2nd century, Rome offered Roman citizenship to all the peoples living within the empire, thus allowing the Romans to sort of assimilate these heterogeneous populations that they ruled over, because there was a great mix of people that were under Roman dominion. So what is the secret to their success? What allowed Rome to just dominate the world around them? So one is they had a large and disciplined military. One of the things that made the Roman military so remarkable was its ability to maneuver. Roman generals could call out orders, and through their standard bearers, armies could move and change formations in a second. This rapid speed, along with having multiple formations, so they had shield walls just like the Greeks did in their phalanx, but the Romans had a formation similar to a turtle. They had wedges, they had what they called opening the channels, which allowed you to create gaps in the formation for charging war elephants to go through. And as a result, they could outmaneuver the Greeks and the Carthaginians and other people that sort of would just rely on one or two battle formations. And this was something that gave the Romans a degree of flexibility in battle that made them very difficult to beat, because it was very hard to get the Romans off guard. The Romans also relied heavily on their navy. They came to dominate the Mediterranean. Under Pompey, they actually, most of their wars in the Mediterranean were against pirates. They were just killing off pirates in the Mediterranean to make the sea lanes safe for travel. Another secret was roads. Rome, you heard the old phrase, all roads lead to Rome? Well, back then they did. And Rome used these roads to move armies across their empire. And lastly, the Foederati. The Foederati are an interesting decision, is that as Rome was trying to secure their borders, one of the big problems they always had was people pouring in over their borders. We hear the same kind of complaining nowadays, but Rome had a very interesting solution. And no, it was not to build a wall. It was China's solution. Rome's solution was a little more intriguing. So what Rome would do is they would take these various tribes that were coming across the border, and they would give them a grant of land just within the border of the empire along its border. And the deal basically was these people could live within the Roman Empire, but they were obligated to defend that territory they were just given, that near the border, from anyone else trying to come through. And so essentially they literally made their immigrants their border patrol, which was kind of a bizarre concept, but for a long time it worked for them. It was an interesting innovation to kind of look at how they did that. And that has been a basic overview of the Romans. So now that this is done, I've attached a worksheet for you all to do. I hope you all enjoy this, and I'll see you all in class promptly.